The crisp autumn air nipped at my cheeks as I pulled up to the sprawling, ostentatious estate. Blackwood Manor. It loomed before me, a monument to old money and even older resentments. I, Amelia Hayes, was the black sheep, the wayward daughter, the one who hadn't quite lived up to the Blackwood legacy. And this Thanksgiving, like every Thanksgiving before, promised to be a masterclass in passive-aggressive family dynamics. I'm the youngest of three. There's Julian, the eldest, a high-powered lawyer with a trophy wife, Beatrice, and two perfectly behaved children, Oliver and Penelope. They embody the Blackwood ideal, successful, conventional, and utterly predictable. Then there's Clara, the middle child, a renowned surgeon married to a charming, equally successful architect, David. They have one child, a precocious 8-year-old named Sophie, who Clara constantly reminds everyone is gifted. And then there's me. 32, unmarried, no children. I'm a freelance writer, working from my cozy, book-filled apartment in the city. I have a small but fiercely loyal circle of friends, a fulfilling, if not lucrative, career, and a sense of independence that seems to baffle my family. To them, my life is a series of missed opportunities, a deviation from the prescribed path. They see a life half-lived, a potential squandered. They see a failure. Thanksgiving at Blackwood Manor was always a spectacle. It was a performance, a carefully choreographed display of wealth, status, and familial harmony. The house itself, a sprawling Victorian mansion with turrets and gables, was a character in its own right. It had been in the Blackwood family for generations, a silent witness to countless strained smiles and whispered criticisms. The air inside always felt thick with unspoken expectations, with the weight of tradition and the pressure to conform. I've always secretly resented the place. It's beautiful, yes, impeccably maintained, but it's also cold, imposing, and suffocating. Just like my parents. My mother, Patricia Blackwood, was the quintessential society matriarch. Elegant, impeccably dressed, and always in control. She ruled Blackwood Manor, and, by extension, the family, with an iron fist disguised in a velvet glove. My father, Richard Blackwood, was a powerful businessman, a man who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. He was a man of few words, but his silences were often more cutting than any insult. I arrived, as usual, fashionably late, not out of disrespect, but out of a desperate need to delay the inevitable. Julian and his family were already there, their expensive SUV parked ostentatiously in the circular driveway. Clara and David arrived moments later, their sleek, hybrid car a subtle, or perhaps not so subtle, statement of their own brand of success. The scene inside was predictably chaotic. The grand foyer, with its soaring ceilings and marble floors, echoed with the sounds of children's laughter, or, more accurately, Sophie's carefully enunciated pronouncements on the origins of Thanksgiving and the clinking of crystal. Patricia was in the kitchen, orchestrating the meal with the precision of a military general, while Richard held court in the living room, sipping a glass of expensive scotch and dispensing pronouncements on the state of the economy. "Amelia, darling. So glad you could make it," Patricia said, her voice a saccharine blend of affection and disapproval. She gave me a perfunctory air kiss, her eyes scanning my outfit, a simple, comfortable sweater and jeans, with barely concealed judgment. "You look comfortable." "Thanks, Mom," I replied, forcing a smile. "You look festive." Her dress was a shimmering gold creation that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Richard nodded curtly in my direction, his eyes lingering on me for a moment before returning to his conversation with Julian. I felt the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. It was always like this. I was an outsider, an anomaly in their perfectly curated world. The pre-dinner rituals were a carefully choreographed dance. Julian and David engaged in a boisterous discussion about investments and golf scores, while Beatrice and Clara compared notes on their children's accomplishments. Oliver and Penelope, dressed in miniature versions of their parents' outfits, were paragons of well-behaved obedience. Sophie, meanwhile, regaled anyone who would listen with her knowledge of quantum physics, or at least, her 8-year-old understanding of it. I drifted through the crowd, feeling like a ghost in my own family's home. I tried to engage in conversation, but my attempts were met with polite smiles and dismissive nods. They talked at me, not to me. I was a prop in their Thanksgiving play, a necessary but ultimately unimportant character. As dinner time approached, the tension in the air became palpable. Patricia emerged from the kitchen, her face flushed but her smile firmly in place. "Dinner is almost ready," she announced. "Julian, Clara, please help me set the table." And then, the moment I had been dreading. Patricia turned to me, her smile widening, but her eyes holding a glint of something that felt distinctly malicious. "Amelia, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We've set up a special place for you, at the children's table." The words hit me like a physical blow. The children's table. The small, rickety table tucked away in the corner of the dining room, usually reserved for toddlers and those deemed too immature for the adult conversation. The table with the mismatched plastic chairs, the paper plates, and the crayon-stained tablecloth. I froze, my mind reeling. I looked at the main dining table, a magnificent mahogany masterpiece adorned with fine china, crystal goblets, and gleaming silverware. It was a symbol of status, of belonging, of being deemed worthy. And I had been explicitly excluded. My gaze met Richard's. He was watching me, a smug expression on his face. He knew. They all knew. This wasn't an oversight, it was a deliberate act of humiliation. A reminder of my place in the Blackwood hierarchy. "Oh," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. "The children's table?" Patricia nodded, her smile unwavering. "Yes, dear. With Sophie. You two can have a lovely chat." Sophie, who had been momentarily distracted by a stray crumb on her designer dress, looked up, her eyes widening with a mixture of surprise and delight. "Aunt Amelia. We can talk about the multiverse." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw a tantrum. I wanted to overturn the perfectly set table and shatter the illusion of Blackwood perfection. But I didn't. Years of conditioning, of being told to behave, to not make a scene, kept me rooted to the spot. "Of course," I said, my voice tight with suppressed anger. "Sounds lovely." I walked towards the children's table, my steps heavy, my heart sinking with each one. The humiliation was complete. I was a 32-year-old woman, relegated to the kids' table at my own family's Thanksgiving dinner. It was a public shaming, a blatant declaration of my inadequacy. I sat down on the tiny, wobbly chair, feeling like a giantess in a dollhouse. Sophie immediately launched into a monologue about string theory, her words blurring into a meaningless jumble in my ears. I stared at the plastic plate in front of me, the garish cartoon characters mocking my predicament. The adults, meanwhile, took their seats at the grand table. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the clinking of glasses. I could hear snippets of their discussions. Julian's latest business deal, Clara's groundbreaking surgery, Richard's pronouncements on the upcoming election. I was invisible, forgotten, erased from the narrative of their perfect Thanksgiving. The food was served, a lavish spread of traditional Thanksgiving dishes. Roast turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie. But it tasted like ashes in my mouth. The humiliation, the resentment, the sheer injustice of it all choked me. I picked at my food, forcing myself to swallow a few bites. Sophie, oblivious to my inner turmoil, continued her lecture on the wonders of the cosmos. I wanted to tell her to be quiet, to stop reminding me of how different I was, how out of place I felt. But I couldn't. It wasn't her fault. As the meal progressed, I felt a growing sense of detachment. I was physically present, but emotionally miles away. I watched my family, these people who were supposed to love and support me, and I felt a profound sense of alienation. They were strangers to me, living in a world I could never belong to. And then, something snapped. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic break, but a slow, quiet unraveling. A realization that I had reached my limit. I had spent my entire life trying to fit in, trying to earn their approval, trying to be someone I wasn't. And it had gotten me nowhere. I stood up, pushing the flimsy chair back with a clatter. The sudden movement startled Sophie, who paused mid-sentence, her eyes wide with surprise. The adults at the main table looked up, their conversations faltering. "Excuse me," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I need some air." I didn't wait for a response. I walked out of the dining room, through the grand foyer, and out the front door. The cold air hit me like a slap in the face, but it was a welcome relief from the stifling atmosphere inside. I stood on the porch, taking deep breaths, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. I didn't know what I was going to do, where I was going to go. But I knew one thing. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't spend another minute in this house, surrounded by these people who had made me feel so small, so insignificant. I walked down the long driveway, my footsteps crunching on the gravel. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see their faces, their expressions of disapproval, their smug satisfaction. I reached the road, and I kept walking. I walked until my legs ached and my lungs burned. I walked until the lights of Blackwood Manor were a distant glow in the darkness. I walked until I found a small, unassuming diner, its neon sign flickering in the night. I went inside, drawn by the warmth and the smell of coffee. I sat at the counter, ordered a cup of black coffee and a slice of apple pie, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from Patricia. "Amelia, where are you? Come back. Dinner is not over." I ignored it. I didn't have the energy to deal with her right now. I didn't have the energy to deal with any of them. Another text message, this time from Clara. "Amelia, please. Mom is upset. This is ridiculous." I silenced my phone. I didn't want to hear their pleas, their excuses, their attempts to guilt me into returning. I sat there, sipping my coffee, eating my pie, and feeling a strange sense of calm. I had broken free. I had finally escaped the suffocating grip of Blackwood Manor. I was alone, but I was also free. The diner was a haven, a temporary refuge from the storm. The waitress, a kind-faced woman with a warm smile, refilled my coffee without being asked. The other patrons, a mix of truck drivers, late-night workers, and solitary souls, left me alone with my thoughts. My phone continued to buzz intermittently, but I resisted the urge to check it. I knew what the messages would say. Pleas, accusations, demands. They would try to pull me back, to guilt me into submission. But I wasn't going to let them. After an hour or so, I paid my bill and stepped back out into the cold night air. I had no plan, no destination in mind. I just knew I couldn't go back to Blackwood Manor. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. I started walking again, aimlessly, letting my feet guide me. I walked through quiet residential streets, past darkened houses with flickering Christmas lights. I walked past parks and playgrounds, empty and silent in the night. Eventually, I found myself near a small, independent motel. It wasn't fancy, but it looked clean and safe. I went inside, booked a room for the night, and collapsed onto the bed, exhausted but strangely exhilarated. I finally allowed myself to check my phone. The messages were as I expected. A flurry of texts and missed calls from Patricia, Richard, Clara, and even Julian. The tone ranged from concern to angry to pleading. "Amelia, this is unacceptable. Come home immediately. You are behaving like a child. This is not how Blackwoods behave. Amelia, please talk to me. What's going on? Get back here. You're making a scene." And then, a message from Sophie. "Aunt Amelia, are you okay? Did the multiverse get you?" I smiled at Sophie's message. It was the only one that didn't make me feel angry or resentful. She was just a child, caught in the crossfire of a family drama she didn't understand. I didn't respond to any of the messages. I turned off my phone and lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. I replayed the events of the evening in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. The children's table. It was such a small thing, really. a seating arrangement. But it was also so much more. It was a symbol of everything that was wrong with my relationship with my family. It was a reminder of my perceived failures, my lack of conformity, my outsider status. I had spent my entire life trying to live up to their expectations. I had excelled in school, gone to a prestigious university, even briefly considered a career in law, at Julian's urging. But it had never been enough. I was always the different one, the one who didn't quite fit in. My choice of career, my lack of a husband and children, my independent lifestyle, these were all seen as flaws, as deviations from the Blackwood norm. They couldn't understand why I wasn't content to follow the prescribed path, to embrace the traditional roles of wife and mother. And I, in turn, couldn't understand their obsession with appearances, with status, with maintaining the illusion of perfection. They were so focused on what other people thought, on upholding the Blackwood legacy, that they had lost sight of what really mattered. Love, connection, authenticity. I drifted off to sleep, exhausted but strangely at peace. I had made a decision. I wasn't going back. Not to Blackwood Manor, not to the life I had been living. I was going to create my own path, my own definition of success, my own family. The next morning, I woke up feeling surprisingly refreshed. The motel room was basic, but it was clean and quiet. I took a shower, got dressed, and went downstairs to find some breakfast. The motel lobby was deserted except for the desk clerk, who was engrossed in a paperback novel. I grabbed a cup of coffee and a muffin from the continental breakfast spread and sat down at a small table near the window. I turned on my phone, bracing myself for another onslaught of messages. There were several, as expected, but one stood out. It was from an unknown number. Amelia, it's Daniel. Daniel Foster. We met at Sarah's party last month. I heard about what happened at your family's Thanksgiving. Are you okay? Daniel Foster. I remembered him. He was a friend of a friend, a writer like myself. We had chatted briefly at the party, and I had found him to be intelligent, witty, and surprisingly down-to-earth. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to reply. Daniel, hi. Yes, I'm okay. Thanks for checking on me. His response was immediate. Glad to hear it. That sounds like a rough night. Want to talk about it? I thought for a moment. I didn't usually confide in strangers, but something about Daniel's message felt genuine, comforting. Maybe. Coffee? Name the place and time. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near the motel. I finished my breakfast, paid for my room, and walked to the coffee shop, feeling a flicker of hope in my chest. Daniel was already there, sitting at a table near the window. He stood up when he saw me, a warm smile on his face. Amelia, he said. It's good to see you. You too, Daniel, I replied, returning his smile. We ordered our coffees and sat down. I told him everything. The children's table, the humiliation, the years of feeling like an outsider, my decision to walk away. He listened patiently, without judgment, without interruption. He didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He just listened. That sounds incredibly painful, he said when I had finished. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Thanks, I said. It's been a long time coming, I guess. So, what now? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. I haven't really thought that far ahead. Well, he said. You're a writer. You're resourceful. You're resilient. You'll figure it out. His words gave me a boost of confidence. He was right. I was a writer. I was resourceful. I was resilient. I had survived worse things than a humiliating Thanksgiving dinner. We talked for hours, about writing, about life, about family. I learned that Daniel had his own share of family drama, his own struggles with expectations and disappointments. We found common ground, a shared understanding of what it felt like to be the different one. As the afternoon wore on, I realized that I was feeling better. Lighter. less burdened by the weight of my family's disapproval. Talking to Daniel, sharing my story, had been a cathartic experience. "Thank you," I said as we were getting ready to leave. "For listening. For understanding." "Anytime," he replied. "We writers have to stick together." We exchanged numbers and promised to stay in touch. I walked back to my car, feeling a sense of hope, of possibility. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. The weeks following my Thanksgiving escape were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. I stayed at the motel for a few more days, using it as a base of operations while I figured out my next move. I spent hours writing, pouring my thoughts and feelings onto the page. It was therapeutic, a way to process the pain and anger I had been carrying for so long. I also started to reach out to my friends, the people who had always supported me, the people who saw me for who I was, not for who my family wanted me to be. They were shocked by my story, but they were also incredibly supportive. They offered me a place to stay, a listening ear, and a much-needed dose of perspective. My family, meanwhile, continued their attempts to contact me. The messages ranged from furious accusations to tearful pleas. Patricia was particularly relentless, bombarding me with texts and voicemails, accusing me of ruining Thanksgiving, of embarrassing the family, of being selfish and ungrateful. Richard's messages were less frequent, but equally harsh. He accused me of being disrespectful, of dishonoring the Blackwood name, of throwing away my future. Clara's messages were a mix of concern and anger. She tried to mediate, to understand my perspective, but she also couldn't help but defend her parents, to insist that they had only meant well. Julian's messages were the most predictable. He accused me of being dramatic, of overreacting, of making a mountain out of a molehill. He told me to grow up and get over it. I ignored most of their messages. I didn't have the energy to engage in their drama, to defend myself against their accusations. I had made my decision, and I was sticking to it. I did, however, respond to Sophie's messages. She was genuinely worried about me, and I didn't want to leave her hanging. I assured her that I was okay, that I just needed some time to myself. I promised to see her soon. After a week at the motel, I decided it was time to find a more permanent place to stay. I started looking for apartments in the city, closer to my friends and my work. I found a small, cozy one-bedroom apartment in a vibrant neighborhood, filled with bookstores, cafes, and art galleries. It was perfect. I moved in, furnishing the apartment with a mix of thrift store finds and hand-me-downs from friends. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. It was a space where I could be myself, where I could create my own life, free from the expectations and judgments of my family. I continued to write, working on a new novel, a story about a woman who breaks free from her family's suffocating grip and finds her own voice. It was cathartic, a way to channel my own experiences into something creative, something meaningful. I also started to reconnect with Daniel. We met for coffee several times, talking about writing, about life, about everything and nothing. We discovered a shared passion for books, for movies, for exploring the city. We became friends, then something more. Daniel was everything my family wasn't. Supportive, understanding, non-judgmental. He saw me for who I was, not for who he thought I should be. He encouraged my writing, he celebrated my independence, he made me feel valued and loved. One evening, several weeks after Thanksgiving, I received a text message from Clara. "Amelia, can we talk? Please? Mom and Dad are really worried about you. And so am I." I hesitated. I had been avoiding contact with my family, but I knew I couldn't ignore them forever. I also felt a flicker of guilt, a sense of obligation to at least hear them out. "Okay. When and where?" We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a quiet cafe near my apartment. I arrived early, feeling a mix of anxiety and apprehension. Clara was already there, sitting at a table near the window. She looked tired, her eyes red-rimmed. "Amelia," she said, standing up to hug me. "I'm so glad you came. "Hi, Clara," I replied, returning her hug. We sat down, and there was an awkward silence. I could feel Clara's eyes on me, searching, questioning. "So," I said, breaking the silence. "What did you want to talk about?" Clara sighed. "Mom and Dad, they're a mess. They don't understand why you left. They're worried sick about you. They're worried about their image." I corrected, my voice hardening. "They're worried about what people will think." Clara winced. "That's not fair, Amelia. They do care about you. Do they?" I asked. Because putting me at the children's table, humiliating me in front of everyone, doesn't exactly scream caring. Clara looked down at her hands. "I know, it was wrong. I told them it was a bad idea. But they didn't listen. They never listen," I said, my voice filled with bitterness. "They never have." We talked for over an hour. Clara tried to explain her parents' perspective, to defend their actions, to convince me to come home. She told me that they were sorry, that they hadn't meant to hurt me. I listened patiently, but I didn't budge. I told her that I needed time, that I needed to figure out my own life, that I couldn't go back to the way things were. "I'm not asking you to go back to the way things were," Clara said. "I'm just asking you to talk to them. To try to work things out." I thought about it. I didn't want to cut my family out of my life completely. They were still my family, despite everything. But I also knew that I couldn't go back to being the person they wanted me to be. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "But I'm not making any promises." Clara nodded, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "That's all I ask." We finished our coffees and said goodbye. I walked back to my apartment, feeling a mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, uncertainty. I had taken a small step, towards reconciliation. But I also knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. Over the next few weeks, I continued to build my new life. I finished my novel, and it was accepted for publication. I spent more time with Daniel, our relationship growing stronger with each passing day. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones. I also started to think about my family, about the possibility of repairing our broken relationship. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that I couldn't simply erase them from my life. One evening, I decided to call my mother. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision, driven by a mix of guilt, longing, and a desire for closure. The phone rang several times before Patricia answered. "Hello," she said, her voice hesitant, uncertain. "Mom, it's Amelia," I said. There was a long silence. I could hear Patricia's breathing on the other end of the line. "Amelia," she said finally, her voice choked with emotion. "Where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom," I said. "I'm in my apartment." "Your apartment?" she repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. "You have an apartment?" "Yes, Mom," I said. "I have a life. I have a career. I have friends." There was another silence. I could almost hear Patricia processing this information, trying to reconcile it with her image of me as the lost, wayward daughter. I didn't know," she said finally. "I know you didn't," I said. "Because you never asked." We talked for a long time. I told her about my apartment, about my novel, about Daniel. She listened, mostly in silence, occasionally interjecting with a question or a comment. I also told her how I felt, about the years of feeling like an outsider, about the humiliation of the children's table, about my need to create my own life, my own definition of success. She didn't interrupt. She didn't defend herself. She just listened. "I'm sorry, Amelia," she said finally, her voice soft, contrite. "I didn't realize how much we had hurt you." "It's okay, Mom," I said. I needed you to hear me. To see me." We talked for a little while longer, about the possibility of seeing each other, of trying to rebuild our relationship. We didn't make any concrete plans, but we agreed to keep talking, to keep trying. I hung up the phone, feeling a sense of relief, of closure. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a start. I had taken the first step towards healing, towards forgiving, towards rebuilding. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but I was no longer alone. I had my friends, I had Daniel, and I had, perhaps, a glimmer of hope for a future with my family, a future where I could be myself, where I could be loved and accepted for who I was, not for who they wanted me to be. The empty chair at the Thanksgiving table had, in a strange way, set me free. It had forced me to confront the pain, the resentment, the years of unspoken expectations. And it had led me to a place where I could finally, truly, be myself.